Welcome. This module will provide background information and ideas for stakeholder engagement and PBIS that can be put into practice in schools. This module is part of the PBIS Fundamentals Learning Series. We begin with a shared understanding of what positive behavioral interventions and supports is in Virginia Beach. Anchored to Goal 2 within our strategic framework, PBIS focuses on the goal of student well-being. PBIS is a data-informed decision-making framework for establishing the social, cultural, and behavior and academic supports needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all students. Every goal within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we are focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division-wide. We identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating and implementing best practices and seeking innovative solutions. Through PBIS, VBCPS has a desire to move toward equitable practices. Through the multi-tiered framework, PBIS provides support for all at the Tier 1 level, for some at the Tier 2 level, and for a few at the Tier 3 level. Tier 1 involves several core components or supports. Tier 1 supports for all students include a focus on relationships and community building, a common language of expectations, consistent structure and routines, student engagement, pro-social behavior acknowledgement, and effective responses to inappropriate behavior. Our learning intentions for this module are to recognize the difference between stakeholder involvement and engagement, understand how stakeholder engagement is a foundation for cultural responsiveness within PBIS implementation, identify ways to leverage stakeholder engagement within Tier 1 PBIS so that we ensure that our systems and practices are meaningful and effective for all stakeholders. Here you see a roadmap for PBIS implementation. We measure PBIS implementation using the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or TFI. This is a tool used to measure a school's PBIS implementation and fidelity. Each spring, PBIS coaches support Tier 1 teams to assess implementation using the TFI. The TFI includes 15 features, which are divided into 3 categories of teaming: implementation and evaluation. In this module, we'll focus on feature 111, student, family, and community involvement, with several other related features embedded throughout. Let's begin with a shared understanding of what stakeholder involvement is. Here we see the definition and scoring rubric for stakeholder involvement as determined by the PBIS Tiered Fidelity Instrument. Our goal is to involve and engage our stakeholders, students, families, and members of the community, and elicit their feedback throughout all phases of implementation. It's really important to understand the difference between involvement and engagement. Involvement implies doing to. In contrast, engagement implies doing with. A school striving for involvement often leads with its mouth, identifying projects, needs, and goals, and then telling stakeholders how they can contribute. A school striving for engagement, on the other hand, tends to lead with its ears, listening to what stakeholders think, dream, and worry about. The goal of engagement is not to serve clients, but to gain partners. Engagement entails a collaborative partnership between all stakeholders, students, staff, family, and community members. We involve and engage our stakeholders in meaningful ways by inviting them to participate in events and activities. We value their voice and their seat at the table during all aspects of PBIS implementation. We do this by making sure we include and engage our stakeholders. We're being culturally responsive in doing so. Much of our learning today includes information from the PBIS Cultural Responsiveness Field Guide as it relates to stakeholder involvement. Here you see a quote from that field guide. Because contextual fit is a core principle of PBIS, it's not considered fully implemented until it's culturally responsive. A primary goal of cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework is to use PBIS principles to change school cultures and systems to enhance educational equity. For further learning, please refer to the module Cultural Responsiveness within the PBIS framework that lives within the PBIS Fundamental Learning Series. Throughout this module, you will see our goals and the exact target we wish to hit in our module. The definition of cultural responsiveness within PBIS includes the following 5 core components: identity, voice, supportive environment, situational appropriate, and data for equity. Today, we'll examine several key features of PBIS implementation and demonstrate how these core components may be interwoven. One of the first tasks for schools implementing PBIS is to develop their school-wide expectations and class agreements. We want to ensure that stakeholders are given opportunities to provide feedback throughout this process. An important aspect when developing school-wide expectations and class agreements is integrating and elevating stakeholder voice. Authentic family or community engagement includes providing families, students, and community members with meaningful opportunities to be heard, voice their opinions, and exercise leadership within the school system. It's important that teams engage families, students, and community members that are representative of the school's demographics and any underserved populations. Students and families should have opportunities to see themselves, their cultural values, and their histories in the school setting. Was this last sentence your experience when you attended school? Also consider, how would the students and families from your current school respond to that question? Staff, students, and families should be involved in some capacity in developing the school-wide behavior matrix. For staff, this could mean that all staff are asked for their input on behavior expectations from the start. Or it could mean that the PBIS team first develops a draft matrix and then asks staff for their input. Schools may identify a small group of student representative of the student population in order to gain their feedback on the behavior matrix and on other topics as well. Schools may hold focus groups about the behavior matrix for family members to ensure that the behaviors chosen honor the collective values. Student voice has many benefits. It increases buy-in among all stakeholders, assists with various phases of implementation, helps with creating a more relatable marketing message, creates opportunities for all voices to be heard, recognizes the unique need for increased student agency and provides opportunity for leadership and civic engagement. On the right, you'll notice an example of one of our high school focus groups at a meeting where they provided feedback on critical components of PBIS implementation. Here we see a group of students from Salem High School's PBIS team, along with the student support specialist who works with the team. A small group of their students attend the monthly PBIS team meetings, make recommendations, and share in decision-making. The team makes sure to seek out student feedback and then act upon it. Here we see examples of how secondary schools have used advisory to discuss school expectations with their students. They started by asking students, "How do you want to feel coming to school every day?" Then they asked students to share what they felt should be expected behavior in each location throughout the school. Student feedback was utilized in the final development of the school-wide expectation. This demonstrates the power of using student voice. Carrying this idea to the classroom level, here we see examples of how student voice is elevated by having students help develop their class expectations. Students can even sign their names to the class expectations posters as a kind of contract. Allowing students to take part in these activities helps ensure cultural responsiveness and increases student buy-in. Staff keep these posters up all year and refer back to them as reteaching tools as needed. These examples are from Lansdowne Middle School and Salem Elementary. It's really important to be aware of and include our students' personal values and cultural norms when developing school-wide and class expectations. Here's an example of a personal matrix activity where students are asked to list what safe, respectful, and responsible looks like at home, at school, and in the neighborhood. This can be a helpful classroom activity in understanding similarities and possible differences across settings regarding behavior expectations. Upon completion of the activity, we ask, where are there similarities? Where are there differences? Are the different school rules necessary for positive student development? What additional practice, teaching, or acknowledgement may be needed?
The personal matrix activity that we just saw, along with other activities and resources, can be found in the PBIS Stakeholder Voice Handbook created by the PBIS coaching team. We appreciate the contributions made by the Office of Family and Community Engagement that helped guide some of this work. The handbook is linked within the resource section of this module. A companion document guiding questions for stakeholder engagement has been developed to assist teams as they work to sustain or enhance their school's level of stakeholder engagement. It's also a part of the resources included within this module. In examining stakeholder involvement and engagement as it relates to school-wide expectations, consider these applications. You might already share matrix expectations with families in a newsletter. To further engage stakeholders, consider involving families in co-creating the school-wide matrix expectations with staff and students, or in providing feedback regarding the matrix. Our goal is for there to be a two-way communication loop in place. After schools develop their school-wide expectations and class agreements with stakeholder input, they need to determine how they will teach them. Stakeholder input plays a key role in the teaching process. An important aspect of teaching the expectations and class agreements is creating a supportive environment. A supportive environment is one where staff work to meet student needs and teach students necessary or missing skills rather than assume students already know them. Staff understand that school expectations exist as a framework to teach behavior rather than a system through which infractions are delivered. Staff also understand that the acknowledgement system is intended to encourage the learning and generalization of desired behaviors. When inappropriate behavior is observed, staff recognize the need to understand a student's personal context and function of behavior, as well as the need to review expectations and reinforce relationship building and social emotional skills. Staff understand that most important of all, students in a supportive environment feel valued. As you consider this description of supportive environment, which phrase stands out for you? An ongoing communication loop is essential between stakeholders. Students may work collaboratively with the PBIS team to design and plan for teaching the expectations. What are their creative ideas for ways they can be a part of the messaging or teaching of the school-wide expectations? The team shares the teaching plan with staff, and students may help create marketing materials. As a way of measuring understanding of the expectations, students and staff can help create an exit ticket or Google survey. In examining stakeholder involvement and engagement as it relates to teaching the school-wide expectations, you may already go over the expectations with students at a pep rally or assembly. To further engage stakeholders, consider having students give their ideas and feedback in team meetings regarding teaching and reviewing the expectations. An important part of PBIS implementation involves developing school-wide and class acknowledgement systems. It's important that we get feedback from our stakeholders when developing and adjusting our acknowledgement systems. Acknowledging desired student behaviors increases the likelihood of these behaviors occurring and contributes to a positive and supportive school climate. In a supportive environment, schools involve students, families, and communities in the development and use of acknowledgement systems in order to create systems that are meaningful and authentic. Staff consider the culture of the students they serve when designing recognition systems. For instance, staff may provide an opportunity for students who receive an acknowledgement to share their success with friends. In a supportive environment, staff understand that learning a new skill requires additional reinforcement, particularly when habits are already formed and ingrained. Teams assess equity and acknowledgement systems. For example, are rewards used consistently with all groups of students? As seen here, a high school PBIS team utilized their student group to help develop meaningful acknowledgement systems. The students were instrumental in the marketing aspect of their acknowledgement ticket, including setting up an Instagram page competition and developing TikTok videos. We want to be sure we're asking our stakeholders questions like, how would you and your peers like to be acknowledged for positive behavior? What incentives motivate you? We want to be sure we're asking families similar questions. What do you think about our current system? What are your ideas about how the system can reach the most students? What's realistic and meaningful? What are your ideas about acknowledging other groups? What about student-to-staff acknowledgements and student-to-student acknowledgements? Student voice and feedback should be elicited in refining school-wide expectations and in acknowledgement. Here we see elementary and middle school examples of student choice. On the left, students at Christopher Farms Elementary chose costumes for their administrators to wear during a school-wide celebration, and also planned and carried out assemblies to reinforce school-wide expectations. On the right, we see staff and students at Kempsville Middle School shared their ideas for staff and student acknowledgement. In looking at stakeholder involvement and engagement as it relates to acknowledgement, you may already share the acknowledgement system with students using staff ideas for student incentives, To further engage stakeholders, consider gaining student feedback regarding ways they'd like to be acknowledged and finding out what kinds of incentives motivate them. As mentioned earlier, PBIS is a data-informed decision-making framework. It's important that we review and share data with our stakeholders on a regular basis. Culturally responsive schools have teams that regularly engage in data-based decision-making with a specific focus on their use of data for equity. The goal is for Tier 1 teams to review and use behavioral data at least monthly for decision-making. It's important to disaggregate the data for analysis and action planning, as this is an objective way to assess and monitor equity in student outcomes. Teams are encouraged to openly discuss trends in the data regarding equity and should have procedures to ensure that data are shared frequently with stakeholders for input and feedback. If teams discover disproportionality within the data, they develop action plans for short-term and long-term solutions. Some data sources that teams use are SEL survey data, office discipline referral data, suspension or expulsion data, attendance data, and fidelity, TFI, tiered fidelity inventory data. Consider whose voices should be at the table and heard. It's important that teams seek stakeholder feedback and make sure the voices of underserved communities and groups that are overrepresented in discipline are essential and heard. Each school has a school planning council where a variety of stakeholders are present and involved. This council might be used as an opportunity to share general data with stakeholders and to elicit feedback and suggestions. The Office of Family and Community Engagement, or FACE, can facilitate these kinds of conversations and is a great resource for support. They stand ready to assist our school communities. Schools may reach out to the FACE office for assistance with this process. In looking at stakeholder involvement and engagement as it relates to data for equity, you may already share data with stakeholders using a one-way format. To further engage stakeholders, consider regularly getting stakeholder input and feedback regarding data with a specific focus on equity. The PBIS coaching team has developed the Guide for Response to Discipline Disproportionality, which has been adapted from the PBIS.org practice brief. Input from Virginia Beach City Public School teachers, school leaders, Department of Student Leadership, students, families, and other central office staff was used to create and revise this guide. Examples for analyzing data and implementing solution action steps are included in this guide. Before using the guide, it's suggested that teams and administrators seeking deeper understanding of cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework view the cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework module. This module, along with the module for using the disproportionality guide, are available in this fundamental learning series. We hope the topics reviewed in this module have provided you with a better understanding of stakeholder engagement and involvement as necessary and important component of PBIS implementation. Thank you for participating in today's learning.